In houses like these, silence isn't merely the absence of sound. It's a presence that watches and waits. I realized this the moment I stepped into the Victorian sobrato I'd inherited from my great-uncle, a man I'd met only twice. The air inside hung stale and heavy, carrying the weight of decades. But it wasn't the dust or the outdated decor that unsettled me. It was the locked door at the end of the upstairs hallway, its brass handle tarnished with age, a small keyhole below it that seemed to stare back at me like a judgmental eye. When I asked Mrs. Abernathy, the housekeeper who'd maintained the property for years, about the room, her face tightened. She informed me in clipped tones that the room had been sealed before she began working for my uncle 30 years ago. She'd been explicitly instructed never to attempt entry and suggested I respect those wishes. There was something in her voice, a tremor of fear perhaps, that made me change the subject, though the room remained fixed in my thoughts. For the first week, I focused on settling in, unpacking my modest belongings, and learning the house's rhythms, the way the pipes groaned when the hot water ran, how the wooden floors creaked in specific places as if marking invisible boundaries. I tried to ignore the locked door, but my eyes were drawn to it whenever I passed, my fingers itching to try the handle despite Mrs. Abernathy's warning. It was during my 10th night in the house when I first heard it. I'd been drifting on the edge of sleep when the notes reached me, delicate piano music floating through the hallway, a melancholy nocturne that seemed both distant and impossibly clear. My body went rigid, heart stammering against my ribs as sweat beaded cold on my forehead. The music continued, unhurried and precise, each note placed with deliberate care. I lay paralyzed for what felt like hours, listening as the piece repeated twice before fading into silence. Only then did I manage to move, stumbling from bed to the hallway on trembling legs. The corridor stretched dark and empty before me, the locked door at its end showing no light beneath it, no sign of recent disturbance. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream, a product of stress, and an old house's peculiar acoustics. But as I passed the locked door that afternoon, my skin prickled with gooseflesh, and I found myself pressing an ear against the wood. Nothing but silence greeted me, yet I couldn't shake the sensation of something waiting just beyond. That night, I decided to stay awake. I positioned myself in an armchair in my bedroom, with the door cracked open, eyes fixed on the sliver of hallway visible through the gap. My mouth went dry with anticipation, and I noted the tremor in my hands as midnight approached, then passed. At 3:17 a.m., the music began again. My muscles locked, a cold weight settling in my stomach as the same nocturne filled the air. I forced myself to stand, legs threatening to buckle as I crept toward the hallway. The music grew louder with each step, its source undeniably the locked room. Standing before the door, I watched with horrified fascination as goosebumps rose along my arms, noting how the sound seemed to pass through the wood rather than be muffled by it. I tried the handle, locked as expected, then pressed my eye to the keyhole. Only darkness greeted me, but the music continued uninterrupted, as if the pianist remained oblivious to my presence. Or perhaps a traitorous part of my mind whispered they were perfectly aware and performing just for me. The following day, I searched the house for keys, rummaging through drawers and cabinets, my movements increasingly frantic. Mrs. Abernathy watched with disapproving eyes, but said nothing. When she left that evening, I asked when the room had last been opened. She paused, her weathered face unreadable, before telling me that some doors were locked for a reason. The chill that ran down my spine had nothing to do with the evening air. By the third night, exhaustion had worn my nerves raw. The music came again, the same piece executed with flawless precision. This time, I noticed something I'd overlooked. There was no hesitation in the playing, no mistakes or variations. It repeated exactly as before, like a recording rather than a live performance. Yet no electricity ran to that room. No device could be operating inside. I spent the next day searching local records, learning that my great-uncle had acquired the house from a family named Blackwood 60 years prior. Their daughter had been a piano prodigy, scheduled to debut at Carnegie Hall before she mysteriously disappeared. The records mentioned a scandal, but details were conspicuously absent. That night, I took a crowbar to the door. The wood splintered under my assault, my breath coming in ragged gasps, sweat dripping into my eyes as I tore at the ancient barrier. When it finally gave way, I stumbled into darkness, the beam of my flashlight cutting through years of undisturbed dust. In the center of the room sat a grand piano, its once glossy surface dulled by a thick layer of gray dust. Around it, the floor remained pristine. No footprints, no signs of recent presence. Most unsettling of all, there was no bench, no chair, nowhere for a pianist to sit. As I approached, my flashlight revealed sheet music positioned on the stand, yellowed with age but clearly displaying the nocturne I'd been hearing. My hand trembled as I reached out to touch the keys, expecting them to be ice cold. Instead, they were warm, as if recently played. The music began again then, the exact same nocturne, but this time, I could see the keys moving on their own, depressing and releasing in perfect rhythm, with no visible force acting upon them. My heart slammed against my chest, my lungs refusing to draw breath as I watched, transfixed by impossible movement. And then, as the piece reached its final measures, I felt it, fingers brushing against my hand with gentle pressure, skin that felt paper-thin, yet undeniably present. The touch lingered for a moment before sliding away, leaving behind a chill that sank bone deep. I live in a hotel now. The house remains as I left it, the piano room door hanging splintered and open. Sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I can still hear the nocturne playing, a distant melody that follows me even here. And sometimes, in that space between wakefulness and sleep, I feel those same ghostly fingers trailing across my skin, a gentle reminder that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. The moment I first heard that phone ring, something in me knew it wasn't right. Not just unusual, wrong. The kind of wrong that makes your skin prickle before your mind can name what's happening. The kind that crawls up your spine at 3 a.m. and whispers that the rules you've built your life around are merely suggestions. That phone shouldn't have rung. It couldn't have. But it did. I'd moved into the Victorian 3 weeks earlier. The real estate agent had called it a fixer-upper with character, which was code for needs work and has problems we're not legally obligated to disclose. Still, the price was right, and I needed a fresh start after the divorce. The basement was my first major project, a cavernous space filled with the previous owner's abandoned possessions and decades of accumulated dust. I found the telephone during my second day clearing the basement. It hung on the far wall, partially hidden behind a stack of water-damaged boxes, an ancient rotary model with a black bakelite body, its coiled cord disappearing into the wall. I'd run my fingers over it, noting the fine layer of dust that coated everything down here. Something about it seemed oddly pristine beneath the grime. I'd made a mental note to remove it eventually, but had more pressing tasks to tackle first. The first call came 5 nights after I discovered it. I was drifting toward sleep when the shrill mechanical ring cut through the darkness. My heart lurched painfully in my chest, adrenaline flooding my system as I bolted upright. The ringing continued, 3 precise measured rings that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. I knew instantly what it was, and that was impossible. I'd checked that phone. It wasn't connected to anything. The old copper wiring had been severed years ago when the house was partially renovated. There was no dial tone when I'd lifted the receiver during my cleaning. Just dead air. Yet it rang. My rational mind scrambled for explanations as I made my way downstairs. Perhaps I'd been mistaken about it being disconnected. Maybe it was on some ancient circuit I hadn't noticed. The ring stopped, just as my bare feet touched the cold concrete of the basement floor. The silence felt expectant, like something holding its breath. The basement was darker than it should have been. My newly installed lights seemed dimmer, their glow unable to penetrate the corners of the room. The phone hung on the wall, exactly as I'd left it, motionless, innocent. I approached it slowly, feeling the hair on my arms rising. The air felt different near the phone, colder, thicker somehow. When I finally lifted the receiver, I expected nothing. What I heard instead was a wash of static, pulsing and surging like ocean waves. I was about to hang up when I heard it, a voice beneath the noise, soft as breath against my ear. It whispered my name, just once, just Michael. I slammed the receiver down, my hand trembling. I told myself it was a cross line, an odd coincidence, my imagination working overtime in a new and unfamiliar house. I didn't sleep that night. The next day I examined the phone more carefully. There was no connection point where the cord entered the wall, just a smooth hole with the wire disappearing into darkness. I considered ripping it out, but something stopped me, a reluctance I couldn't name. Instead, I covered it with an old drop cloth and continued my renovation work, trying to forget. 3 nights passed in blessed silence. On the 4th night, it rang again. This time, I was in the kitchen. 3 rings precisely spaced. My coffee mug slipped from suddenly numb fingers, shattering on the tile. My mouth went dry as paper. My pulse hammered in my throat. Against every instinct, I descended the stairs again. The drop cloth lay in a heap on the floor, though I was certain I'd secured it tightly. The phone gleamed in the weak light, looking somehow more solid, more present than the objects around it. When I answered, the static was louder, more agitated. The whisper came sooner this time, my name repeated with an urgency that made my skin crawl. Michael, Michael. Then a pause, and words that froze my blood. I've been waiting for you. I asked who was there, my voice cracking. The static swelled, drowning out any response. When it receded, there was only silence. The calls became regular after that. Always at night. Always when I was alone. Sometimes just my name. Sometimes fragments of sentences I couldn't quite piece together. I began sleeping upstairs, as far from the basement as possible. I consulted an electrician who confirmed what I already knew. The phone wasn't connected to anything. He suggested removing it, but when we tried, the tools inexplicably failed. Drill bits broke, screwdriver heads stripped, saw blades dulled against the bakelite that should have yielded easily. I researched the house's history. The previous owners had lived there only 2 years before leaving abruptly. Before them, a family had stayed for decades, until their eldest son disappeared without explanation. Police reports mentioned he was last seen entering the basement. Nothing was ever proven. The whispers gradually became clearer. The voice knew things, details of my life, thoughts I'd never spoken aloud. My reflection in mirrors began to look wrong somehow, like someone wearing an ill-fitting mask of my face. I caught glimpses of movement at the corners of my vision, but never directly. The basement grew colder, despite the summer heat outside. Last night, the voice finally told me what it wanted. As the static parted like a curtain, it spoke with perfect clarity. "Let me in, Michael. Just once. Just for a moment." I refused. The lights in the house flickered violently, and I heard a slow, deliberate footstep on the basement stairs. Then another. Something was coming up. I fled the house, spent the night in my car, but I've returned now. The phone hasn't rung today. Instead, it emits a soft, constant hum I can feel more than hear. Sometimes I think I see a faint glow from the basement. I've packed a bag. The realtor expressed surprise when I called about selling already, but didn't press for details when I named a price well below market value. I'll be gone by nightfall. But as I write this, a thought keeps surfacing. What if it follows me? What if that voice wasn't coming through the phone but using it, finding its way from somewhere else? And what if, having found me once, it can find me again? The phone is ringing now, in daylight, for the first time. And I find myself wondering, what would happen if, just once, I said yes? In the Grand Meridian Hotel, history breathes through century-old walls. Ornate moldings watch from above like silent sentinels, and crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across marble floors. But on the 12th floor, after midnight, something else moves through the corridors. Something that leaves only the faint scent of lavender and the echo of footsteps that shouldn't exist. I never believed in ghosts until my third night at the Grand Meridian. I'd chosen the hotel for its historic architecture, perfect research for my next architectural design project. When the concierge handed me the keycard to room 1242, his fingers trembled slightly. He mentioned something about the 12th floor being temperamental, but business travelers filled the lower floors. I dismissed his concern as customer service theatrics designed to add mystique to the aging property. The first 2 nights passed uneventfully. I worked late, sketching design elements I admired throughout the building. But on the third night, I woke at 3:17 a.m. to the unmistakable sound of footsteps passing my door. Slow, deliberate steps, with the distinctive click of heels against hardwood. My room bordered the elevator lobby, so late-night foot traffic wasn't unusual. But something about these footsteps made the hair on my neck stand on end. The cadence felt wrong, too measured, too purposeful for a drunk guest stumbling back to their room. I rolled over, pulling the blanket tighter. That's when I noticed it, a subtle scent of lavender drifting through the room. Not the artificial chemical lavender of cleaning products, but something deeper, more organic, like dried flowers crushed between the pages of an antique book. By morning, the experience had faded to a strange dream, easily dismissed in daylight. At breakfast, I overheard 2 staff members discussing the night wanderer. The older employee was instructing a new hire to ignore any reports about a woman in a Victorian dress on the 12th floor. According to him, management had reviewed security footage repeatedly and found nothing. They attributed the sightings to the power of suggestion and the building's historic reputation. Their conversation planted a seed of curiosity. That afternoon, I casually asked the front desk clerk about hotel ghost stories. Her professional smile faltered for just a moment. She explained that old hotels collected stories like dust. the Grand Meridian's most persistent tale involved a woman who once lived in what was now the penthouse suite. The clerk insisted it was nonsense, perpetuated by overworked night staff with active imaginations. I nodded politely, but noticed how her eyes darted toward the upper floors as she spoke. That night, I returned to my room early, determined to catch up on sleep. As I drifted off, the air conditioning hummed a mechanical lullaby. Then, at 3:17 a.m. precisely, I jolted awake. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized what had woken me. Footsteps in the hallway, identical to the previous night. The same measured pace, the same deliberate rhythm. My mouth went dry. I lay perfectly still, listening as the steps slowed directly outside my door. The handle didn't move, but something shifted in the air pressure of the room, as if someone stood just on the other side of the door, listening as intently as I was. I tried to convince myself it was just another guest, but my body betrayed my rationalization. Goosebumps spread across my arms and cold sweat beaded on my forehead. Then came the lavender scent, stronger than before, seeping under the door like invisible fog. My pulse pounded in my temples as I watched the digital clock tick from 3:17 to 3:18. The footsteps resumed, continuing down the hall until they faded entirely. I didn't sleep again that night. In the gray pre-dawn light, I convinced myself to check the hallway. It was empty, of course. No footprints in the plush carpet, no lingering scent of lavender, nothing to validate the terror that had gripped me hours before. Over breakfast, I researched the hotel's history on my laptop. The Grand Meridian had opened in 1897 as a symbol of the city's prosperity. Old newspapers mentioned a socialite named Eleanor Blackwood, who had taken permanent residence in the hotel's top floor in the early 1900s. She was known for hosting lavish parties and wearing her signature lavender perfume, which she claimed to import from France. The article stopped mentioning her around 1919, with no explanation for her sudden absence from social pages. That evening, I requested to see the security monitoring room, claiming I'd lost a valuable watch and wanted to check if the cameras had captured anything. The security manager reluctantly agreed. As he showed me footage from the 12th floor corridor, I noticed something strange. Brief moments when the digital timestamp would freeze for a second or two before continuing. When I pointed this out, he dismissed it as a common glitch in their aging system. I returned to my room, with my nerves wound tight as piano wire. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually won. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I awoke not to footsteps, but to the overwhelming scent of lavender. It filled the room like thick smoke, making it difficult to breathe. My lungs burned with each inhalation. The temperature plummeted suddenly. I could see my breath fogging in the moonlight that streamed through the window. The bathroom door, which I'd left ajar, slowly swung closed with a soft click. My muscles tensed, frozen in primal fear. Something shifted in the corner of my vision. A ripple of movement like dark water. A long shadow stretched across the wall, though nothing cast it. My vision tunneled as panic set in. I tried to reach for the bedside lamp, but my limbs felt disconnected from my commands. The shadow on the wall elongated, taking the unmistakable shape of a woman in a flowing dress. I heard the rustle of fabric, like heavy silk dragging across the floor, though I saw nothing to cause the sound. The digital clock on the nightstand flickered, the number scrambling before settling back to 3:17. It hadn't changed. Time itself seemed suspended. With tremendous effort, I managed to grab my phone from the nightstand. My trembling fingers activated the camera, sweeping it around the room. Through the screen, I saw nothing unusual, until I pointed it toward the bathroom door. There, barely visible in the phone's dim light, stood a tall figure in a dark dress. The screen distorted, pixelating around the edges of the shape, as if the digital technology couldn't properly process what it was capturing. I dropped the phone, scrambling backward until my spine pressed against the headboard. The lavender scent intensified until it was nearly choking. The temperature continued to drop until I could see ice crystals forming on the inside of the window. Through chattering teeth, I managed to ask who was there. My question hung in the frigid air, unanswered but not unacknowledged. The shadow on the wall shifted slightly, its head tilting as if in consideration. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. The temperature normalized. The lavender scent dissipated. The shadow melted back into ordinary darkness. The clock jumped from 3:17 to 3:24, as if catching up with lost time. I checked out of the Grand Meridian the next morning. The front desk clerk didn't seem surprised by my early departure, though she politely inquired about my stay. I couldn't bring myself to explain. As I waited for my rideshare outside, I glanced up at the 12th floor. In the bright morning sunlight, I could have sworn I saw a figure in one of the windows, just for a moment, watching me leave. And even from the street, I caught the faintest hint of lavender on the breeze.